Today's topic is getting started with Agile Marketing, and my name is Anita Taylor. A little bit about me: I am a marketing nerd, and I've been doing this process I'm going to talk about called Agile Marketing since March. So with that, let us get started. So what we're going to talk about today is why all the fuss about Agile. Agile marketing is a big buzzword. You may or may not have seen it or heard of it. So we're going to talk about why all the fuss. Then I'll tell you about what it is, and I'll walk through some basic concepts about Agile. And then last but not least, I will talk about my company Hopscotch and what we gained from implementing Agile. So first, why all the fuss? Well, the reason people are starting to do Agile is because of horrible reasons like these. A lot of marketing departments would our bosses literally ask us, what do you do all day? They don't understand what we do all day. They see us sitting in chairs, but it's like, well, what do you do all day? And, they might be, we need more leads, we need more this, we need more that. Why aren't you delivering it? How can you deliver it? They want us to do more with less. Or my personal favorite is, I know you're busy, but can you do blah, 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 blah for me? And last but not least, I think in every industry that everything is changing so fast, and as marketers we need to keep up and be able to adapt to things like Snapchat or Instagram or changes in how our customers do business. So Agile is something that can actually help with these kind of problems that face marketing departments. So it has some built-in ways to make the work that marketing's doing more visible. It helps you be focused on your goals so that you can do the things you need to do, like drive leads. It helps you be more productive. It helps you say no to people nicely with a little bit of power behind you. And it helps you stay focused on your customers and to adapt to changes in your business. So teams that do marketing, Agile marketing, they say things like they're able to get things done faster, they're able to be smarter about what they do in the first place, they're doing things that their customers respond to better, and they get more respect internally from their own CEOs. So now that we've talked about the glowing things about why people are doing it, let's talk about what it actually is. What it is it's actually a new way of working. So it's part philosophy, and I'll go a little bit into the philosophy. It's part project management. So where Agile came from, it literally came from the world of software development. So we're here in the beautiful Microsoft building. Well, if you're old enough to remember the 90s, you might remember that in the 90s, Windows 95 would come out. And then 3 years later, Windows 98 would come out. And 2 years later, Windows 2000 came out. And it was like this great big product that had every bell and whistle, and it was a great big thing. But if it wasn't, too bad for the company and too bad for the development time that spent 2 or 3 years of their life building it. If it got to market and it didn't match what people actually wanted, too late, too bad for you. So that way of building software products is called waterfall, where you have this great big project and it's going to be perfect with all these bells and whistles, and then you're going to deliver this whole big thing in one swoop, boom. Well, in 2001, a group of software developers rebelled, and they published something called the Agile Software Development Manifesto. And basically the manifesto said that they value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. They value working software over comprehensive documentation. They value customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And they value responding to change over following a plan. And this became a big thing in the software development world, and a lot of software teams went to Agile. So Agile, the best way to think about Agile is Facebook. So with Agile, you're not going for a great big perfect product. You're releasing a lot of little things over time. So you start with something called a minimal viable product. So if you think about Facebook, it started with pokes, right? Then eventually it became likes. Now today it's loves and tears and rage face and whatever. But they did it in small little increments over time versus one big perfect software dump. So what happened is a lot of marketers at these tech companies, they said, hey, you know, we can learn from what our engineers are doing. They were hearing their engineers talk about things like sprints and scrums and agile versus waterfall, and they started going, this kind of applies to us too, because if you think about traditional marketing, you might spend half of the fourth quarter coming up with marketing budgets and plans and your whole year-long plan for everything you're going to do for marketing. And that plan might be obsolete by March because your business has changed. So marketers said, maybe we need to be more agile too. So in 2012, a bunch of marketers came out, and they came out with their own manifesto. And this is at agilemarketingmanifesto.org. But, you know, to boil these 7 principles down, basically what they're saying is, as marketers, we're not going to do something just because the highest paid person in the room loves the color blue or thinks that this is the right message. We're actually going to go out and listen to our customers, learn from our customers. We're going to base things on data. We're going to base things on what the customer wants. We're going to do small things and build versus one big campaign that sucks up all our money and all our time, and maybe it flops and maybe it doesn't. We're going to learn. We're going to discover. We're going to be flexible. We're going to respond to change. So that's kind of how Agile came to be. Now I'm going to quickly go through some Agile terminology. Now the disclaimer here is this is the super dumbed down version because I didn't go and read every single blog about Agile, and I didn't immerse myself in the philosophy because frankly I don't care. I was looking for a better way to get things done. So this is my dumbed down version. If you're academic and you want the real philosophical version, you can Google any of these terms and come up with 1,000 blog posts that'll, you know, explain them in depth. But these are some typical terms you hear in Agile. One is backlog. Backlog is a fancy way of saying that you have a list of everything that you need to get done in one place. So if we were a team of 5, we would have a backlog for all of us in one place. So it's not in one person's head, it's not in one person's spreadsheet, it's a whole backlog of everything that needs to get done. Then there's something called a sprint. A sprint is basically the time period that you work on a set number of tasks. Most Agile marketing organizations use 1 or 2 week sprints. Some people do sprints as long as a month. It's really up to you. It seems like a lot of people are leaning now towards a week versus 2 weeks. I personally use 2 weeks, but it's an individual decision. A user story is basically a way of considering what the customer wants and what the customer needs. So it's basically in the form of as a blank, where blank is your target persona or the target person you're trying to reach. You're talking as if you're the customer. As a blank, I want to be able to do this, see this, do this, so that such a result can happen. So it's really about, instead of saying, let's do an event because we want to or because it's what we've always done, it's let's try to do this from the customer standpoint. What's the customer going to get out of this, so that you build things from that point of view. The next concept that you'll hear a lot is story points. So story points is basically a way of estimating work. So the best way to think about it is, instead of looking at your task list and going, this is a 1-hour task, this is a 2-hour task, this is a 10-hour task, which is kind of the trap that you automatically go to, and I'll speak about that from personal experience in a little bit. Story points is a different concept where you're really looking at tasks in relation to other tasks. So the developers who explained it to me in a way that I finally got it, they talked about t-shirts, small, medium, large, extra large. When you're looking at your task list, you're looking in terms of effort and complexity. Is this task twice as hard as this task? Is this task twice as hard as that task? Is this task twice as hard as that task? And then that's how you score your tasks. The reason you do that instead of time is if you're part of a marketing team, right, your best marketer might be able to do that task in 1 hour. Your worst marketer might be able to do that same task in 5 hours. If you're coming up with a time-based estimate, it's never going to be correct. But if you come up with an effort-based estimate, that's more likely to be consistent and constant. Next is sprint planning. That's basically a meeting where you choose what goes into each sprint. So you look at the backlog and you say, these are the things we're going to tackle in our sprint. Then you'll see fancy terms like Scrum, Kanban, Scrumban, and a bunch of other little googly-goog terms. These are just basically different ways of doing Agile and the specific rules you follow to do the sprint. So Scrum is kind of the traditional way that software started, where you have a certain period of time, you have certain tasks that are in the sprint. Once the sprint is started, you can't stick stuff in. So it's really about how the sprint is governed. So these are kind of 3 approaches. I won't go into the nitty-gritty details of each one, but all you need to know is these terms basically mean the rules that you use to do the Scrum, to do the sprint. Boards. One of the characteristics of Agile is that you have a visual board. Sometimes the boards are physical, where someone will have a war room and they'll have a whiteboard and they'll draw some columns on it and they'll just move sticky notes across the board. A lot of companies do it electronically. On the cheap end, they'll use a system like Trello that's free. When on a more complex end, they might use a system like JIRA or some of the other project management systems out there. But basically, it's a way of taking your work and visually showing what you're waiting to do, what you're working on, and what you've completed. Stand-up meetings are a daily check-in. So the whole team gets together. It's called a stand-up because you do it standing up so that people don't rattle on and on and on and on and on. But each person goes around and the questions are, what did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? And what's blocking you from getting your work down? So the point is to get everyone talking to each other, and if there's bottlenecks or problems, to float them up so that they can be solved versus things just slowing everything down. Retrospectives, that's basically a meeting to discuss how the sprint went. And then there's different ways of measuring the success of the sprint. So depending on whether you're doing Scrum or Kanban or Scrumban, there's different methods of measuring how well the team handled the sprint. So that's kind of Agile 101. Now let's talk about getting started, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is Agile can really give you a sense of power and control because you have a set period of time, you have set tasks. When people come to you and ask for more, you can say, it's not in our sprint. We'll see you in a week or 2 weeks and we can fit it in based on priority, but no, you can't just come to my desk and interrupt everything that I'm doing. So that's the good. The good is also that because you have a board that's visible, you no longer have to answer the question, what does marketing do all day? Because you can say, this is all the stuff we're doing all day, and this is why it matters. The bad, it's a big change to how you work. Not a little change, a big change. So if you're someone who likes to hide in the corner and be secretive about what you're doing, no secrets, you're on the board. If you're someone who's kind of, let's just say you're kind of a slacker, you're going to be flushed out. It's visible, it's on the board. And if you're someone who doesn't like to document and track, you're going to hate it because you have to document and track your work, especially if you have software. So it's not for everyone. Ugly, planning and tracking. You're going to spend a lot more time planning, tracking, reporting. For some people, not for everyone. So those are things you have to think about before you go into Agile marketing, because everyone does not like it. Now, let's talk about a real-life example. This real-life example is Hopscotch. We're a mobile technology platform. We're based here in El Segundo. And basically what we do is we have a mobile platform that spins up mobile apps for colleges, live events, and sports teams. And then it lets the customer manage their content and monetize it. So I am the head of marketing, and we are a tiny team. Tiny meaning this many people, me and one other person. And we want to look and feel, behave, and perform as if we're a 10 or 20 person marketing team, because we have aggressive growth goals like every startup. So the problem that we were having is, because there's just two of us, we were spending a lot of time just jumping and hopping and going through hoops and doing fire drills, and at the end of the day we weren't spending enough time on the strategic things that were actually going to build pipeline and revenue going forward. We were just dealing with emergencies. So our first steps, and really it came about because I had one Friday where I just had a meltdown, because I'd been wanting to do Agile for months, but I was so busy, I didn't have time to go read the blogs, and I didn't have time to figure it out, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And one day I realized, okay, I'm trying to do perfect Agile. I'm trying to go read all the blogs, become an expert, so it's like Windows 95. I'm trying to build the Windows 95 of Agile. And I'm like, okay, Agile is minimal viable project. It doesn't have to it doesn't have to be perfect. So I just said, okay, we're doing it, finally. So we got in a room and we said, okay, the fire drills aren't going to go away. How are we going to manage the fire drills? We decided that we would spend up to 40% of our time on fire drills and 60% of our time on the things that were in our sprint. Then we looked at our work and we said, okay, we're a marketing team that has a lot of stuff to do. So we put all of our work into buckets: content marketing, demand gen, the website, PR. So we kind of put all of the things our marketing department was responsible for into buckets, and we said, okay, how much time should we be spending on each bucket in order to move this company to where we want to be? So we kind of set targets for ourselves of where we really wanted our time and effort to go. And then based on that, we started putting tasks into our first sprint. Okay, we want to spend X% on demand gen. Well, let's put these demand gen tasks in first, and then, that's how we determined what went to our first sprint. And we used a free whiteboard tool for our first board. So this is what our first board looked like. We had a free whiteboard tool. I spent a few hours playing with colors and post-it notes, but these are like digital post-it notes that we could put from one column to the next and drag them. So a lot of marketing teams use a tool called Trello, T-R-E-L-I-O. So Trello is free and it's kind of low effort. So that's what a lot of marketing teams do, and a lot of them just do the physical board with physical post-it notes. So it doesn't really matter what you do, but the concept is to do in progress done. So let's talk about some of the rookie mistakes that we made. The first rookie mistake, and I think it's the mistake that every team does when they first do Agile, is we way overestimated what we could do. So the first time we did our sprint, we said, okay, there's two of us, that means we have 80 hours. So we crammed what we thought was 80 hours worth of work into our sprint. What we found out, and we were lucky because we're a tech company, we're fortunate that we have a tech team that does Agile, so we had people to stop us and go, no, 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 that's not how you do it. So our Scrum Master was like, no, 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 you don't have 8 hours. So with the dev teams, at least at my company, they don't base a sprint on an 8-hour workday. They base it on a 6-hour workday, because you have meetings, you have emails, you have stuff that comes up. So the first thing is assume that you have 6 hours of quality work time, not 8. The second thing that we did was we thought in terms of hours, not effort. So again, this was before I understood the concept of a story point, because I'll be honest, I resisted story points. I thought that was stupid. I was like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what it means. I want to just do hours. Well, the problem is most of us are bad at estimating hours. I, for one, am. I've learned this from doing Agile. I underestimate almost everything. I always think, oh, that'll be easy. That'll be 2 hours. 10 hours later. Yeah. 10 hours later. It's like, oh, man. So with what we found with story points, and my Scrum Master kind of drilled this into my head. I didn't believe him at first, but after 3 or 4 sprints, I realized he was absolutely, positively right. With story points, what we found is at the end of the sprint, the number of story points we had completed, constant. For second sprint, 60 points. Sprint after that, 59 points. Sprint after that, 61 points. So it's when you estimate things based on the effort, not what you think the time is going to be, you'll find out that there is a certain level that your team can do, and that level is pretty much predictable, and then you can plan your sprints. So now when we plan sprints, we plan for 60 story points, and that's consistently what we do. It's completely counterintuitive, but I swear to God it worked for us. Okay, other rookie mistake, not breaking tasks down. So I'll give you an example, right? You might have a task that's like, get an email out the door, and you think that's the task. Or you might have an even bigger task like launch a new website. Well, getting an email out the door isn't actually one task. It's several tasks. Right. Writing the email copy, getting the email copy approved, building the email, pulling the list, deploying the email. So with Agile, you start to get better at breaking tasks down into little bitty chunks. And the next slide, I'll explain why that's important. So it makes you better at estimating, and it also keeps things from sitting. So what was happening our first couple of sprints is we had these big tasks that weren't broken down. Mm-hmm. So they'd be sitting in our in progress column forever for all the 2 weeks, because we were working on this one big thing, whereas if they were little discrete tasks, things would have been moving the whole time. Now that falls back to the other thing about the planning and the tracking. If you don't like planning and tracking, the process of breaking a simple task called get that email out the door into 4 or 5 tasks will drive you nuts. But it actually saves your life. Because if you don't break your task down, what you start doing is putting bottlenecks into the sprint. So one of the concepts that we learned is the concept of ready for work. Mm-hmm. So basically that means, and it happens to us a lot in marketing, right? We create something, we are waiting for approval. We've sent something to an agency, we're waiting for the agency to come back with the deliverable. There's a lot of places where we're waiting for information, waiting for approvals, etc. So if things are broken down, then writing, okay, there's no bottleneck. I can put my butt in the chair and write this anytime I get ready. If I have to get approval from someone before I can deploy the email, if that approval gets stuck, you can't move forward. So one of the things we learned in the sprint is if you're waiting on something, it can't go into the sprint. It goes into the sprint when you can actually do the work. So there's different methodologies. So that slide a few minutes ago about Scrum versus Kanban versus Scrumban. Basically, we personally use something called Scrumban. So it's basically we use the 2-week sprint. So that's from Scrum. We use that as a framework and we plan for a sprint. But if something's waiting on approval from a sprint ago and the approval suddenly comes in, we have the option or the discretion to move that into this sprint if it's important enough. So that's kind of the dumbed down version of what Scrumban is. Last but not least, one of the big mistakes I made was paying lip service to working together. So if you actually go out and read some of the stuff about Agile, they talk about how it fuels collaboration and kumbaya, it brings everyone together and gets everyone on the same page. Well, it does that if you do that. So I'll be honest, when we started Agile, I didn't do that. You know, I got buy-off from senior management on going Agile. So that I was in communication. They knew that I was going Agile. I told them I was going Agile. I told them what, you know, it meant to go Agile, which they already knew because they have tech teams that are Agile. But I didn't really do the work of really truly collaborating. So it is important. So with, you know, depending on the size of your organization, a lot of time Agile starts with a single department or even a single person. So they kind of just do it. And then once they can prove that it works, then higher ups get interested in how they're making the sausage. So a lot of times it does start from the bottom up. But you need to make sure that your key stakeholders feel that they have a say in what's going into the sprints and that they know what's coming out of the sprints. So that communication piece is actually important, and the bigger your company, the more important that piece is. So this is what our board looks like now. We've been doing this since March, so we're on Sprint 17. Sprint 17 actually ends today. So we went to JIRA, which is the software that our tech team uses. So the whole company is pretty much standardized on JIRA. Not every marketing team needs this level of tech behind it. But if you do use a software like this, it basically allows for reporting, you know, because it's tracking everything. And it's part of the good, the bad, the ugly. If you don't want to be tracked, if you're not pulling your weight, well, all this stuff is on the back end. They can pull a report that says, Susie good, Joni bad. So that's one of the...
Does it send push notification, like reminders and stuff to you?
This particular software, I don't think it does push, but they do, well, I turn all my pushes off, so it may do push. But this does email notifications.
That's what I meant, yeah.
Like if a task is assigned to you, you get an email. If someone comments on your task, you get an email.
Oh,
that's kind of pretty standard for most of this type of software.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you do a software, it kind of makes the process of repeating tasks easier. Like I can clone a task with all of the stuff that's behind it. So this is kind of small to see, but I mean each task basically has the number of story points, it has who it's assigned to, and then you can attach files and comments and everything to every single task, so you really have a history of what you're doing. So if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, someone could come into JIRA and they could know pretty much everything I'm working on and where it stands because it's all lined up here. So what we started to do when I kind of realized that I had missed the boat on communication and collaboration is I started putting together a report every sprint for my CEO. So this is manual. This data is coming out of the software, but this is something that I jot down because as you can see the board's very complex with a whole bunch of tasks. Nobody wants to plow through this. So I just broke it down. This is what we worked on by category. This is the percentage of time that we spent doing demand gen versus PR versus the website versus whatever. This is the concrete wins that we got in this 2-week period. These are the main things we worked on. These are ongoing things that we do every sprint. And then I have a little content production summary that shows where major pieces of content are. Is it with design? Is it with copy? Is it with approval? Are we in the process of publishing it? And then very quickly, what are our top 3 priorities for the next sprint? So this kind of gives them a high-level view of what we're doing. It solves the problem of what does marketing do all day. Lets them know what we're doing, but without them having to sift through JIRA to get all of the details that they really don't necessarily want to be on the weeds on anyway. So what did we get from this? Like I said, 2-person marketing team, a lot of things to do. What did it allow it to do? What Agile allowed our team to do is it allowed us to do inbound marketing. So if you're familiar with inbound marketing, it's kind of that term was coined by HubSpot, but it's basically content-driven marketing. where you're not just going buy me, but you're producing content that is valuable to your target audience, and you're moving people through the sales cycle by really building a relationship as a trusted advisor. So before we started doing Agile, we weren't doing this. This is, kind of marketing best practice 101, but we didn't have time. We were so busy working on the little stuff, we never got to the big stuff. So with Agile, we said, we're focusing on this sprint. We're focusing on this sprint. So it really carved out the time, and we were doing strategic stuff every sprint. So one of the things that I'm proudest of is we were able to create a persona. So we called him AAD Andy. We actually went out and talked to 10 people in our space, like in-depth 45-minute conversations.
And I think that's hilarious because that is so relevant to so many people.
Yeah.
Right?
So, if you're familiar with HubSpot, they have a free inbound marketing course where they kind of talk about the theory behind all this, and you can kind of, learn it. It's, kind of been, I'll say, the marketing fad for the last few years is this whole concept of inbound. But basically, it's marketing 101. It's like know your customer, know what your customer cares about, and then give them things of value. So what we were able to do is really learn our target customer, what they care about, how their performance is judged, what publications they read, how they use social, what conferences they go to. And then from that, we went out and did a survey of their customers. So we knew that AAD Andy wanted to know what his fans were doing in terms of football attendance and whatever. So we went out and commissioned a survey of AAD Andy's customer. We put together a comprehensive ebook and multiple infographics that's about his customer. And then we marketed it to him using the publication that we know he reads every day. It was a publication I hadn't even heard of. And out of these 10 guys I spoke to, 8 of them said, oh, we read this publication every morning. Well, darn. So we took up ad space in that publication. And basically we saw in our first month and a half of doing our first infographic, we got about 60% of our target companies saw this infographic. 30% downloaded our ebook and filled out a form.
Wow.
I mean, it's like, oh my God. Oh my God. The marketing gods are smiling. Along the way, we're also able to do case studies. We did 3 very in-depth case studies, 15-page ebooks, plus related infographics, plus all the other crap that we were doing before that wasn't moving the needle, but that we were having to do because it's a startup and everybody's got to just run. So Agile allowed us to get all of this done. And I can tell you that I've worked at 20-person marketing teams that didn't get all of this done in a 4 to 6 month span. So that's what Agile did. Now let's ask the question, did it matter? Well, heck yeah. Our website traffic went up 300% year over year.
Wow.
Most importantly, our leads, the number of new people who filled out forms and made it into our database, 3,500% growth. Customers, 400% growth. So in my case, Agile saved my sanity. Agile gave me boundaries that I didn't have before. Agile forced me to focus on the right things and be productive, and it paid off in, results. So I am definitely a proponent of Agile. I personally first found out about Agile about 4 years ago at a Marketo, a Pardot user conference. And I was like, what is that? What is that? What is that? And it kind of had been in the back of my mind for 4 years. Like, what is this Agile thing that they keep talking about? It sounded so weird and so scary, but I'd like to try it one day. And then when I was at the startup and suddenly I was queen of the marketing department, I could do it. Well, for me, it definitely paid off. So some, nuts and bolts things you can do if you're curious. And by the way, I will be, actually, it should already be tweeted out. I tweeted out a link to this presentation on SlideShare, so if you use the DGS16 hashtag, you'll see it. If you just want to get some basic kind of thought about the philosophy behind Agile Marketing, those first 2 sites will kind of talk about that. They're good resources to learn about Agile. This is one that I found super interesting. This is one of the Agile Marketing groups on LinkedIn. They did a roundtable. It's like about an hour-long video, so it is kind of an investment in time. But it's 4 different marketers talking about how they have implemented Agile in their organizations, and it was a good cross-section. Like one of them was an agency, one was a small company, I believe one was a larger company, so it gives you lots of different little perspectives. That was very valuable. And then there's a couple of LinkedIn groups that are Agile Marketing focused. So those are some quick things you can do to learn about it and to get started. And on that happy note, let's have questions. Questions, discussions.
I came in early, so you may have covered it, but the story points, is that what you called them? How do you figure that out? Because that to me is very, and it's counterintuitive.
It's
because
very,
I'm exchanging value, like time for, resource. I go into hours, but you're right, because I noticed that my teams completely underestimate the time it takes them to do a task.
Yeah, so the way to think about it, and it's not scientific, and usually you'll do it, you'll do it in a group, or, like with me and a team of 2, we do it in a group. Most of the times we agree, occasionally we disagree, and then we'll either lower it or higher it, or make it higher. But the way to think about story points, the best, example I got from the tech team was t-shirts. Small, medium, large, extra large, jumbo. Okay. So think about a small task, and your brain will automatically still think time to a certain extent. But to me, a 1-point task is something easy that I can do in an hour or less. Okay. So for example, I have a task right now where I need to rewrite 1 paragraph on the home page. Duh. I can do that in an hour. That's easy. I don't need anything from anyone. I just need to put my butt in the chair, drink some Diet Coke, and write. Right. So that's a 1-point task. A 2-point task might be something like write a blog post. 2-point task is, to me, it's usually nets out to 2 to 4 hours. It's a little bit of work, but it's usually something I can do in a morning or in an afternoon, right? 4-point task is something that's twice as hard or twice as involved as that. Okay. So a 4-point task, like a 4-point task we currently have is planning the holiday party, right? We need to go figure out where this is going to be. That entails calling people, doing research on the website, going and doing some visits. Well, that's 4 times as hard as sitting my butt in the chair and writing a blog post. So we gave that 4 points. I gotcha. Okay. Now what we learned is that if we have a task and it's like an 8-point task or a 16-point task, that probably means we don't know what's involved or we haven't thought it through. Because even the biggest thing that you can think of, like relaunching a website, that's a pretty big friggin' task, but it's not 1 task, it's 20 tasks or 30 tasks.
Now, so you break those up, let's say planning a website, is that broken up for you into a few different sprints? So you're not, I get it, so you're not focused on we're building, we're going from start to finish. You're focused on the small accomplishments
on
of
the
this
small things along the way, but you can't just be in a vacuum and just look 2 weeks at a time. Right. You do still have to look at the big picture, but you're planning it. So in the case of like the website, I looked at the website, and it's not scientific, right? I said, okay, each page is 2 points. Okay. Some pages are harder than others, so some pages were really 1 point, some pages might have been really 4 points, but conceptually, instead of having 1 big task like, oh my God, I need to redo the website, it became, okay, we've got 40 pages, and each page needs this, each page needs this, and this, and, chunking it down.
That's really interesting.
So, a couple things. One is you're so right about the approvals thing. I feel like that slows everything down, but it's a thing. Does that get factored into your sprint as like the 40% fire drills, or like how do you? Because sometimes that's actually, oh, I got approval, but now there's like all this work to do, and it's like suddenly like the deadline is suddenly, the approval takes forever, but the thing still needs to go out. How do you work that into a sprint?
For me, what would happen is once I write it, let's say I write it and writing it is 2 points, or I design it and designing it is 2 points. Then it goes to Mr. Exec. Fortunately, I'm at a startup, so I don't have that as much as I used to have when I was at a larger company. I came from a utility right before the startup where approvals would take months. It would literally take months to get one letter out the door. It drove me nuts. But the way to deal with approvals is I will break a task down into kind of the stuff pre-approval and the stuff post-approval. So for example, writing it might be 2 points or 4 points. Getting it back from the executive and taking it to the next round, that might be 2 or 4 points again. So that's kind of how I plan for it from a story points perspective. Because as you know, sometimes rewriting it is as bad as writing it in the first place or creating it in the first place. So yeah, I put different story points based on the perceived level of effort after I get all the feedback back from all the stakeholders. And you might do it depending on how your approval cycles run. You might have 2 or 4 tasks, Rev 1 approval, Rev 2 approval. And usually you'll see that the amount of time will go down. Like Rev 3 approval shouldn't be the same as, Rev 1. So that's kind of how I manage it in terms of, this doesn't control your stakeholders. So it doesn't do anything for the fact that, VP Johnny gave it to you at 3 o'clock and it needs to go out at 5 and oh my God, you're going to have to scramble. It doesn't solve for that problem, but it does allow you to plan for knowing that Johnny's approval is going to take you 4 points or whatever.
So when you're doing this and you set aside 40% for like fire drills, does that mean that like if you actually looked at the sprint schedule, it would be like there'd be like 40% like blank at the beginning of the sprint, and then suddenly gets filled up, or how does that work?
Actually, how we handle that piece has really changed over time, and fortunately, it hasn't ended up being 40%. It's really ended up being more like 18 or 20%. Thank God. But what we did initially is, one way to do it is that your sprint isn't your whole 40-hour or 80-hour week. So if you're saying that 20% of my time is going to be hoo-ha, that's my technical term for it. All the stuff that comes in that I don't want to do is hoo-ha. So you have your hoo-ha bucket. So one way to do it is to say that your sprint is only X amount of story points and the hoo-ha never goes into the sprint at all. What we ended up doing is initially we just had a bucket of 40% of our story points was reserved for hoo-ha, and we only put in story points for the stuff that we thought we could do. That's kind of how we started. So we used to say 12 points a piece are hoo-ha, and we would just put them in the sprint, 12 points, and then as stuff came in, that would just come out of that 12-point hoo-ha bucket. That's actually not what we're doing now. Now what we're doing is, because we're doing Scrum Band where we kind of slide things in as they come in if they're important enough, what we do now is we just count those as tasks. So when they come in, we just stick them in as tasks with their own story points behind them. But what we do in planning is we don't fill our sprint up to the gills. If we know our velocity is 60 points, well, I actually always fill my sprints up to the gill, and my colleague always says, Anita, stop it, we're not going to get all that done. Type A, sorry. But one of the things you do is you don't fill it all the way up to the gills because you leave room for that other stuff to come in. And sometimes your sprints just get blown up. I mean, I had a situation a few weeks ago where a big proposal came in and everything had to stop, and the whole sprint got blown up. I was 100% on something else that I hadn't foreseen or planned for. that happens. We're in marketing, unfortunately, that's part of what happens. But this has been a remarkable tool for minimizing that. Because when people come to me, hey, can you do whatever? Yes, I can. Not the sprint. My sprint ends on this date. We can definitely slot that in for the next sprint.
I love that. I love that.
And so sort of the inverse of the thing is like, and I'm sure this rarely happens, but is there a time where you've overestimated how much stuff you have, you finish it early? Is there like is that blow everything up also, or is there a way of doing what do you do with that?
The way, that's part of why we do Scrum Ban instead of traditional Scrum. And if you read all the internet stuff, you'll see Scrum is kind of more rigid in that way, so a lot of marketers do Scrum Ban. But your backlog, think about all the stuff you have to do. How big is your stuff you never get around to bucket? So all of that stuff is in the backlog. So if something happened, like you put in work that wasn't really ready for work because you thought it was coming. So you were expecting to send 12 points on VP Johnny's whatever, and VP Johnny never came through, and now you're in the middle of the sprint with this big gaping hole. Backlog. Okay, I'm waiting on Johnny. What else have I got?
So backlog is just like unscheduled tasks, basically.
Unscheduled stuff that you know you need to do. And backlog grooming or sprint planning, super important. And pretty much most marketers hate it and don't do it properly and well. But it's super important. So basically sprint planning is you get together, you look at your backlog. Because some of the stuff that you put in the backlog 2 months ago or 3 months ago is no longer relevant. The salesperson who thought that was so important is no longer with the company. Or you're no longer going after that vertical. So all the stuff you thought you needed to do for that vertical, you don't have to do anymore. So backlog planning is really you going through your backlog and saying, okay, I marked this as waiting. Am I still waiting for this? No, this is actually ready for work. This could go into a sprint. You have things prioritized, so I'm going to go back to my sprint board, even though it's probably too small for you to see it. But this is a priority level. So we have 4 priority levels, from P0, which means something's burning down, to P4, which means who cares really, but we'll do it if we have time. Most of our stuff is P2. That just means normal priority. You can see this is marked as a P1. So in your backlog, you have tasks that are marked by priority. You'll also see that we have here ready for work versus waiting. And then we also have a due date. Like something's not that important, but it needs to get done, and the due date is tomorrow. So how we keep things from falling through the cracks, if something has a hard date, we put a due date on it, we put priorities on all the backlog, and when we go through the grooming, we look at our P0s, we look at our P1s, we look at our P2s, we look at our P3s, we look at our P4s, and we reprioritize things if the priority has changed. Our backlog is hundreds of tasks long. Like our tech team, they have a backlog that's thousands of tasks long. So sprint planning and grooming is tedious and time consuming, but if you don't do it, you don't plan your sprints well. So I will be the first to admit that I do not do this as well as I need to, and what inevitably happens is I forget that something's coming up, and then it's like, oh crap, so I plan the sprint, and it's, we plan our sprints on Friday. We go through a Monday through Friday 2-week sprint. So we'll plan the sprint on Friday, and then on Saturday I'll be like, I forgot about if you do your sprint planning, you won't forget, and you won't have those own emergencies of your own making because you didn't
That makes sense.
you didn't groom.
Was there, when you transitioned to this as a marketing team, was there What was the growth like in terms of people, your team adapting to it?
Well, because I'm a two-person
It was
team,
probably easier, yeah.
because I'm a two-person team, the adaptation was really easy. On that video that I talked about, which really is worth, if not watching, listening to as you do other stuff. One of the people was from a very large department, and he made a statement, something to the effect that Agile didn't work that well if the team was more than 8 people.
So you have to be more nimble.
So I don't know if that's true or false, right? I've implemented it in a very, very small team. There are big companies that do that. One of my friends works at IBM, and he's
Dell
doing Agile.
Software is a client of mine, and they went over about 2 years ago, and I know they struggled with the integration of it. I mean, all of the people that I talk to, like in marketing on a normal basis, were always, scrum, I have to go to this stupid meeting. Like
Exactly.
you know, because of the time that it took.
Yes, and it does take time. Like the initial shock of planning this stuff out, putting story points on stuff, doing a backlog. Our first planning session took us probably 6 hours. That was largely because we didn't know what we were doing, but it was also because when you first do it, it's an investment of time.
Right.
But it pays off if you embrace it, and it really isn't for everyone. But I got sidetracked, but you were asking if it's easy for the team to adopt it.
Yeah, no,
I think that, most, from what I've heard, it tends to kind of start rogue, and the reason why is in order for it to work, the people doing it have to want to do it and believe in it. If it's shoved down your throat from the top down.
that's what happened at Dell Software, and it was pretty much rejected. But so the more you talk, I can understand when you said a lot of times it will start from the bottom up, and it makes sense because people have to really believe in it.
And because it really does change the way you work. It changes the way you work.
So interesting.